Okay,
Okay, good. Yeah.
so I guess we're starting. Go.
Yeah. Well, you use the ones that you have.
Okay, so
Good afternoon, Sydney.
hi,
How are you?
I'm good. You?
I'm good. I can see the top of your head and your dad. Now I see your picture and I see your dad standing over your shoulder. Go ahead.
Okay, number 3. What
Now,
did you do?
well, let's start from the beginning so we get it recorded, okay?
Okay. Number 1. What year was it when you were 14?
It was 1964.
Okay. Number 2. What was your neighborhood like when you were my age?
I lived in a segregated neighborhood. That meant that we lived in the black section of town. It was a middle-class neighborhood where both my parents worked. My mother was a professional. She was a school teacher, and my dad owned his own business. Um, Most people in our neighborhood own their own, well, everybody in our neighborhood owned their own homes, and most of the kids in that neighborhood were about my age. But it was a safe neighborhood, no crime. We didn't lock our doors during the day. And that's the neighborhood I grew up in. I grew up on a lakefront, so I was an avid swimmer when I was growing up.
Okay. Number 3. What did you do for entertainment at my age?
Well, for entertainment at your age, we watched television. There were no computers. Um, I swam a lot. We participated in sports. There was organized sports in our neighborhood. There were extracurricular activities such as softball, baseball. We had an active community when I was growing up. We went on family vacations, so that was entertaining. Both my parents were in the house, so it was. I think it was a good childhood.
Okay. When you were 14, what was the most exciting thing that happened to you?
When I was 14, the most exciting things that happened to me that I started to have hair to come over my lips, and I felt like I was growing a mustache. I was very excited about that because my father and all my uncles had mustache, and I thought I was never going to grow any hair. So that's, be honest with you, I was excited about growing up.
Okay, number 5. What were the rules in your house when you were my age, and did you rebel in any way?
I was a good student. I complied most of the time. The rules were you had to be in before dark, in the household before dark. There was no profanity. We had to go to church every Sunday and go to and attend Sunday school. We didn't skip school. We had to be in school. Um, I was a good kid. I started to feel myself at 14. I had a rebellion in my head, but I complied.
Okay. Describe your school when you were my age.
I went to a segregated school in my neighborhood. My house was at the corner of 4th Street and what was called Lake Mart Drive at the time. And my high school was on 6th Street. So that was right about 2 to 3 blocks away. So I was close to school. Again, it was segregated. There were all African-American students and teachers. We had a Caucasian nurse who visited the school occasionally. Um, we felt like it was a village because we were accountable to not only our parents, but the teachers. And if we misbehaved, there was a direct connection between our parents and the teachers.
Okay. Who was the president when you were my age?
The president was John F. Kennedy. And I remember distinctly that I was in a trigonometry class in November of 1964, and the president was assassinated. And I still never forget that because that was a woman who I still know today who walked into class and said, "Oh my God, someone shot the president. He's been assassinated." So John F. Kennedy was the president when I was in 1964, when I was 14 years old.
Okay. Did you have any jobs when you were my age? If so, what were they?
Oh my God, yes. I had jobs, but they weren't jobs outside the house, so to speak. My father owned a business, so let's start with this. At home, I washed dishes, I cooked breakfast. That was my chore. And I still know how to cook breakfast today, but I don't do it. So I was a cook and a dishwasher. I did lawn care. That was one of my responsibilities. And I also had the responsibility to clean the lake out. I really just didn't like cleaning the lake out, but it was good for me at the time. So that was at 14. That was my responsibility. Then on the weekends, my father had a citrus harvesting business. Therefore, I went out and picked oranges and put them in a bucket, and I made extra money to go along with my allowance at that time.
Okay. What year did you start college?
I started college in 1967. That was the year I graduated high school. Right out of high school, I started Polk Community College. I graduated in June. I started Polk Community College that June. I took political science and basic logic.
Okay. What job did you enjoy most?
The job I enjoyed most, I worked for the House Judiciary Committee, 1984, 85, as a legislative aide, and my boss was a congressman by the name of John Conyers from Detroit, and I really enjoyed that job because he empowered his staff, and I had a lot of creativity, and I felt like I was making a difference.
Okay. Back to when you were 14, who did you admire most when you were my age?
My father, his name was Herbert Miller.
Okay. What was new when you were my age?
That's a difficult question. 1964, what was new? We listened to a lot of music back then, and we had Motown. That was music out of Detroit. That was the Motor City, so most of the cars were made there. So they had a music industry called Motown. So at that time, the Temptations, Diana Ross and the Supremes, and all those people were known entertainers. So the actual music and the hip hop and the style of music at that time was new, and that created a whole environment from 1964 until the 1990s. Music started to change then, but that was what was new in 1964 for me.
Okay. What was socially accepted in your community when you were my age?
Social acceptance in our community was to protest. We lived in a segregated community. United States was basically coming into its own with civil rights. So we were expected to be politically conscious and to stand up for our rights. And there was a lot of racial strife going on at that time because there was resistance to African Americans asserting themselves. But we were taught to be Black and proud, and that has continued on today. And for me, it created a sense of identity that I still maintain today about who I am. And I'm an African American and a proud individual today, not necessarily in that order of importance.
Okay. Number 14. Where are all the places you've lived?
I've lived in Winter Haven, Florida, Tallahassee, Florida, Augusta, Georgia, Columbia, South Carolina, Kansas City, Missouri, Leavenworth, Kansas, again in Tallahassee, Florida, Atlanta, Georgia. I stayed for a brief period of time in Palo Alto, California. I've lived in Washington, D.C., College Park, Georgia. I spent some time living with your father in Fairfield, Ohio. And of course, I live in Winter Haven, Florida today.
Okay. Back to when you were, yeah. Where were your parents, brothers, and sisters born? And can you include their names and approximate ages, please?
My father, Herbert Miller, was born in Wassissa, Florida. That's in the northwest panhandle of Florida. My mother was born in Auburndale, Florida, which is in central Florida, Polk County, in the center of the center of the center of the state of Florida. I am the oldest of 3 children. My name is Herbert Ronald Miller. My business name today is Ron, but my name is Herbert Miller. I was born in Winter Haven, Florida. My sister, Sandra Elaine Miller, was born in Winter Haven, Florida. And my brother, Edwin Leonard Miller, was born in Winter Haven, Florida. And I played a part in naming him.
Okay. What was your part in naming him?
Who was my what? Can you repeat the
What
question?
was your part in naming Edwin Miller?
When he was born, everyone was proud. We were excited. I sat in the waiting room with my cousin, Barbara Jean. My dad was there. He was very proud. He passed out cigars in the waiting room. I remember that.
Really?
Believe it or not, it was still segregated at that time. Even though integration had started, we had a particular section that we sat in, and they were asking about names. And my dad looked at me, and that's what gave me the idea that he was asking me for input. And I chose Edwin, and Barbara Jean, my cousin, picked Leonard. So we named him Edwin Leonard Miller. I had the first name, and my cousin Barbara Jean had the middle name. And my parents accepted that, and it made me feel so good that I was allowed to participate in that. And I believe my father would encourage me not to pick a name within the family, but I think what my dad, because my father and I had talked about names because all of our cousins were named after someone else in the family. And I believe my father empowered me with that, and I spoke out with what I thought.
Wow.
Okay. Back to when you were in school. What was your favorite subject?
Political, civics. I'll never forget that I excelled in civics. I was interested in politics. I studied. My mother had me with magazines. I was ashamed as a child to be an African-American person, and my mother, rather than trying to scold or lecture me on that, bought me magazines. And I found out that there were politicians in Africa. I found that Ethiopia was the political capital of the African continent. So my leanings were towards civics, government, and things of that nature. I eventually worked in the government at a high level, and I think I was motivated from my household and some of my teachers by just taking basic civics. I was very socially conscious as a child.
Okay. This is the last question. What was some of the most important current events when you were my age?
Well, the war in Vietnam was beginning to start. So that was, and there were a lot of people my age within my high school, right after they graduated high school, were drafted into the military. We had a draft at that time. Civil rights, because we're African American, was prominent, and there was a lot of unrest in the streets and in the community at that time. There was also a change in identity. Not only were African Americans proud of their hair, we started to not cut all of our hair off. We started to grow what we call afros at that time. Before then, African American men cut all their hair off, or they had processes. They would put chemicals in their hair so that they can look like white people. And we had a sense of identity. So in 1964, things started to change. We had an identity that was very important and stuff. So the social consciousness of who I am as a person and what I am as a person, that started a revolution. At that time, not only did African Americans do that, younger whites started to protest too. They started to grow their hair long just like we did. And they rebelled against the white establishment. And a lot of the progressive whites rebelled against their parents and fought for us, the rights of other people at that time. So whites had what we call hippies, because the hippies rebelled against all the institutions that had happened before then. So that was a revolution happened in the United States when my brother was born back in 1964, because the whole landscape had started to change and the political conscience had changed. Television was prominent. We didn't have the internet, but we can see exactly what was happening. It wasn't like on the radio reading in the news. We had current events at that time. We can see the Vietnam War on television, on the news. It was important in our household that we watched the news every day after we sat down and ate dinner at the table. And then after we ate dinner at the table, we all sat and watched the news. I still watch the news today because my father and my mother encouraged us to know what was going on in the community. But that was something else that was prominent in 1964. In 1964, we didn't have to hear about the racial unrest. We didn't have to hear about who we were. We could see other people growing afros, and we weren't the only one growing afros in our community. We could see on television for the first time that other people were actually had afros too. So that was the whole country started to change at that time, and it was like an evolution and a revolution at the same time. And your brother was born into that, and he grew into that. At least my brother did. I watched him grow into that and have a sense of who he was before he ever left home. Thank you for the interview.
You're welcome.
Thank you. No other questions, Sid?
No, that's it.
Something I could